Hello, I'm Tom Meeks, and this is 3D Design for Fun and Life, featuring Moment of Inspiration, using the uniquely easy Noun and Verb method.
The focus of this session is an introduction to the verbs on Palette 2, Tab 1, Edit. Palette 2, Tab 1, Edit. As we have demonstrated in previous video lessons, the fundamental building blocks of 3D solid nouns are 2D nouns called curves. Early in a student's experience with Moment of Inspiration, it is common to believe that open curves, like lines and arcs, will print. This happy ghost pendant is a good example. They see the lines as distinct features. So they are quite surprised when they print their happy ghost pendant with a 3D printer and the result is a completely blank ghost. Learning how to turn these lines into features that can be 3D printed is a valuable exercise, and the verbs on Palette 2, Tab 1 Edit are instrumental in performing these tasks. We'll come back to our happy ghost at the end of this session and correct all of the issues after being introduced to the tools that will help us fix them.
To get the most out of each verb on Tab 1, we'll introduce them in a somewhat different order than we find them on the Edit tab. We'll start with the show points verb.
The show points verb. Here are sample curves from all of our 2D noun groups. We will select all of them. Starting high and to the left, we hold down the left mouse button as we drag down and to the right. We'll click on Show Points to instantly see that every one of these shapes is defined by a set of points. What will become clear when demonstrated is that there are two different types of points. The circle, arc, ellipse, and helix in this view are exclusively defined by what we call control points, meaning they result in soft curves. The line, rectangle, pentagon, and star are, in this view, exclusively defined by corner points. Corner points define hard angles. The only curve that is defined by both types of points is the freeform line. Most of the points are regular control points, but one of the points is a corner point where the line takes a hard turn. The most important thing to know about Moment of Inspiration's 2D curves and the points that define them is this. Any shape can become any other shape by moving, adding, or subtracting points. Let's examine moving points. We'll move some points in the circle. Individual or groups of points can be selected and moved, resulting in changes to the original shape. We first select a single point and move it. Now we'll select multiple points to move. What was once a circle is now quite different. If we click on the Add Point button, we can add a point to any 2D curve. There is one option. If it is unchecked, we will add a regular control point. Let's add a control point in the middle of the top line and move it. We can add a corner point by checking the corner point checkbox. We'll check corner point and add the corner point to the bottom line of the rectangle and move it. The difference between the point types is obvious. We often add points to give us finer control over a shape. We can also subtract or delete points. There is no dedicated verb button for subtracting points. We just select a point or points and press the delete key on our keyboard. Or we can select a point or points and click on the general delete button at the bottom left of the Moment of Inspiration screen. Let's delete some of the points in the star.
Before moving on to the other verbs on the Edit tab, we want to point out a very useful verb that does not have a button on the Moment of Inspiration interface. In fact, Moment of Inspiration has a number of useful verbs that do not have a button anywhere on the Moment of Inspiration palettes. We can find these commands by clicking on the Help button and locating the section called Additional Commands under the command reference link. We can enter these special commands into the X, Y, Z edit box at the bottom of the screen or create a shortcut to run the command. The rebuild verb. Rebuild is one of these commands. It allows us to redefine the number of control points of a curve or curves. Here is an example of a line tracing that needs further refinement. But when we click on Show Points, we see that there are so many control points that the task is overwhelming. We need fewer control points to make the task of refining the image easier. This is exactly where the Rebuild command is helpful. We select the drawing and enter Rebuild into the X, Y, Z edit box. A dialog box pops up that lets us change the number of control points by changing the tolerance value. We'll enter a new value of 0.1. This makes refining the drawing a lot easier. We can always add a point where it might be needed. Now let's turn our attention to the join verb.
The join verb. The join verb has more than one function. The join verb can sometimes help us create or recover curves that were used to create a 3D object. If we select each edge of our 3D object and then click on the join button, we see that it has created a new set of curves as independent objects. This brings us to the second function of the join verb, combining several unconnected curves into a single curve. When we select the shape on the right, we see that it is actually 4 different curves. Selecting all of the curves and clicking on Join combines them into a single curve. Join is usually more effective than Boolean union when it comes to combining open end-to-end curves.
The separate verb. The separate verb does just the opposite. It breaks single curves into multiple parts. But there's one rule. It breaks items apart at corner points. It cannot separate parts if there are no corner points. We'll select the curve to the right. All of it turns yellow. Click on the Separate button. Deselect everything and select the same curve. Only part of it is selected. It was broken apart at the corner points. If we try to separate the circle, nothing happens. We must first add corner points. Try separate again. It worked. The circle is now 2 arcs.
The trim verb. The trim verb uses one curve to cut another curve where the curves cross. We can then remove the cut segment should we wish to do so. We've drawn a corner rectangle that crosses a slanted line in 2 places. Click on Trim. The prompt says Select Objects to trim. We'll select the line and the rectangle. To see how a mutual trim works, we click on Done. Notice that the trim indicates that both the line and the rectangle can be trimmed. The prompt says Select Pieces to remove or push Done to keep all. Let's select 1/2 of the rectangle and click on Done. The line is untrimmed, but only half of the rectangle remains.
Trim has another useful function. This freeform line remains open. The ends were never connected to form a closed curve. While it's possible to show points and try to drag one loose end to connect to the other loose end, it can be challenging and time-consuming. There is a better way. We know we can connect 2 ends of lines using the blend verb. But when we try to do so with this freeform line, nothing happens. However, if we cut this single line into 2 parts, blend will work. We'll draw a line across the freeform line. Select the freeform line and click on Trim. We are asked to select the cutting object, and we will select the new line and click on Done. We click on Done again to finish the process. We now can use Blend to create a new line connecting the 2 parts. Delete the cutting line and use Join to combine all the pieces to create a new closed curve.
The extend verb. Extend requires two objects. One of the objects must form a boundary that intersects the extension of the other object. The straight line will be our boundary. We'll first try to extend the inner arc using the left side of the arc as our selecting point. We click on Extend. Select the arc. Click on Done. Select the boundary and click on Done. Now we'll try the outer arc, but this time we'll click on the right side when we select it. It makes a difference where we select our curve to extend. Only one end of a curve will be extended at a time. If we want to extend both ends, we have to apply the extend verb twice. We can then create a closed curve by using the trim and join verbs.
The copy verb and paste verbs. This version of the copy verb makes one copy at a time. We select an object or objects and click on the copy button. The copy is stored in the computer's clipboard. To reveal the copy, we use the paste verb. When the copy is pasted, it immediately becomes the focus of selection. It's a good idea to immediately give the copy a new name to differentiate it from the original.
The hide verb. The hide verb applies to objects hidden when the hide button is pressed. It toggles these previously hidden objects between show and hide. Notice that the Christmas tree remains unchanged because prior to clicking on the hide button, we had previously used the object browser to show it.
The lock verb. If we select an object and click on the lock verb button, the object turns gray, and a small lock appears to the left of the name in the object browser, indicating that it cannot be changed. To unlock, we simply click on the lock button again.
The history verb. Many verbs in moment of inspiration make use of history to enable us to alter the new 3D object by changing or moving the underlying 2D curves. We'll loft these curves and move one to demonstrate. But if we select our lofted object, then click on History, and then click on the Disable Update button, the object will no longer respond to changes with the loft curves. Clicking History again and clicking on the Enable Update button restores the history function.
Getting back to our happy ghost. We'll use some verbs from Palette 3 and some verbs from Palette 2 to convert our 2D curves into 3D features that can be printed.
We decided to engrave the features of the ghost, so that when light is placed behind the ghost, the light will make the features glow. The ghost is 3 millimeters thick. Let's start with the eyes. Clicking on both eyes, we will open Palette 3, Construct, and then click on the Extrude Verb button. We'll check the Both Sides option and enter a value of 2.6 millimeters. Click on an empty space on the View window to deselect everything, and go to the 3D view. The reason we use the Both Sides option is to make it easier to select the extrusion when using Boolean diff. Select the ghost by clicking on it, and click on Boolean and then diff. Notice how using both sides makes it easy to select the eyes to subtract. There is no reason to keep the eyes. Select the eyes and click on Done. Engraving the eyes is complete. Now, turning to the eyebrows, we will select both eyebrows and extrude them 2.6 using the Both Sides option. We're not finished because we've only created thin walls that will not print. We need to give them horizontal depth. We do that by applying the extrude verb to the new faces of the extruded eyebrows. Select the faces of both eyebrows. Turn off both sides and extrude 1 mm. Now we can use Boolean diff to engrave the eyebrows. So far, we have not needed the verbs on palette 2, but that is about to change. The curves appearing to form the mouth are two different curves. Looking closely on the left side, we see the lines have a common endpoint, but closely examining the right side shows that there is a gap. We must close that gap if we are to convert the open curves of the mouth to a single closed curve. Deselect everything. Click on the bottom line. Open Palette 2, Tab 1, Edit. Then, click on the Extend Verb button. It asks us to select our boundary object. We'll choose the top line and click on Done. The bottom line extends to meet the top line. But now the top line extends past the point where the lines meet. To fix this, the top line must be trimmed. Select the top line. Click on the Trim Verb button. Then, select the bottom line as our cutting object. We see the small extension, bounded by 2 control points. Click on that small segment and click on Done. Now, use the Join verb to combine the top and bottom lines. We extrude the mouth 2.6 with the Both Sides option checked. Because we created a closed curve, the extruded mouth is now a solid object. We use Boolean diff to engrave the mouth. Our happy ghost can now be 3D printed with all its features.
This concludes the introduction of the verbs found on Palette 2, Tab 1, Edit. The final introductory overview video in this series will include the verbs on Palette 2, Tabs 2 and 3, and the new Palette 4 verbs. Subsequent videos will focus on detailed instructions for using each noun and verb with specific projects for fun and life.